The story begins with the imperial family of Hadalamid falling to such depths as betrayal. Evenrose knew that this day would come. The lady always told her father about the need to reform the homunculus system. Forbidden alchemy was used to establish the absolute monarchy of the homuncles. These were people created with an innate gift for magic and fencing. They were brainwashed to be loyal dogs of the imperial family. The homuncles were sent to the most dangerous battles under the pretext of achieving prosperity and peace in the empire. The homunculi, who were given the rank of imperial knights in recognition of their abilities, were treated well, but these people were no different from slaves. In such circumstances, it was quite normal for the homunculi to hold a grudge against the members of the ruling family. Through their actions, the imperial family continued to fan the flames of evil, which sparked a rebellion. And if Lady Desmond II's father simply ignored the danger, then Bridget, the third princess who became the heiress, only made matters worse. After Bridget was named crown princess, the exploitation of slaves became even more brutal, and the homunculi sent on long missions were killed in dangerous battles or died from hard labor. Those who served at the palace ended up in Bridget's harem, where their knightly dignity was completely trampled underfoot. Evenrose could no longer tolerate this, and began to search history for precedents of the loss of the title of heir to the throne. But Bridget, for whom Ivanrose had become superfluous, used her to arrange a political marriage. Unfortunately, such was the fate of all women who had no power. In just a week, all the knights, the palace's homunculi, were gathered by Michaelis Agniotto to raise a rebellion. The man's mind was not clouded by the power of the imperial family, and he had outstanding leadership skills. After beheading Ivanrose's father, who blindly believed in the power of obedience, he became the new ruler and gave his first order, which was to execute all members of the Hadalamid family, and all except the seventh princess, Evenrose Cloel Hadalamid, and Roseni were already dead. A month had passed since Evenrose had been imprisoned in the palace, waiting for her time to come. The princess knew that soon only Roseni would remain. The Philosopher's Stone was a symbol of imperial power and only reacted to the blood of members of the imperial family, so they needed to leave at least one person alive. Roseneit was in love with Michaelis and was willing to do anything for him, so that woman turned out to be the perfect choice for him. Although Ivanrose felt sad, she did not want to live in such conditions. The princess could only regret that the choice of heir had been wrong. Suddenly, Sir Agnetto entered the room where Evenrose was. Michaelis was the personal knight of Evenrose's sister Roseni and led the rebellion. The man slowly entered the room, noting that the princess probably did not expect to see him. Evenrose immediately asked what had brought him to her. To the lady's great surprise, Michaelis had come to see her. Evenrose couldn't understand why Michaelis had come to see her at a time when he should have been busy with the usurpation. The man noted that he had indeed been very busy over the past month, but had still found a little free time. Evenrose glanced at Michaelis from under her eyelashes. She considered such behavior very thoughtful on Sir Aginto's part, but pointed out that she did not need his care. Michaelis came too close to the lady. He even thought that the woman had become sad during her imprisonment. Ivanrose asked her husband to step away. Michaelis reproached the lady for choosing him as her personal knight. Members of the imperial family chose one of the knights, the homunculi, to be their personal servants. The homunculus chosen by a princess or prince had to serve his master with absolute loyalty. At first glance, this seemed romantic, but the imperial family could get rid of them at any time and treated the knights as expendable. Because Ivanrose rejected this system, she did not have a personal knight. For this reason, the lady was criticized as a princess who did not know the rules. Unlike Ivanrose, Roseneit fell in love with Michaelis and ruthlessly got rid of her knight to choose him, but he had planned to use the poor girl from the very beginning. Michaelis believed that Ivanrose should have been more sensible and chosen him, because then she would not have been waiting for a death sentence. It occurred to the princess that Michael didn't care who played the role of the silly princess puppet. The man took his head in his hands, and after thinking for a moment said that the lady was right. Michael considered Ivanrose to be a complicated woman. Suddenly, the butler burst into the room with the guards. The frightened man said that something was wrong with the child in the Empress's womb. The gentleman stood up abruptly and hurried to leave, barely managing to say goodbye to Ivanrose. When everyone left the room, the lady's hands began to tremble. She imagined with horror that her execution was imminent. Leaning back on the sofa, the woman fell into deep thought. She believed that she had grown accustomed to constant fear and loneliness. Suddenly, someone entered the room. It was Ivanrose's sister, the 8th Princess Rosniet, Hope Hadalamid. Upon entering the room, the woman immediately smiled. The lady saw that her sister Rosania looked well. It was clear that the woman was heavily pregnant. Her sister told her that she was carrying Michael's child. It was hard for Ivanrose to believe this, as homunculi did not have reproductive functions. Rosani laughed, thinking that her sister considered her a traitor. But that was not the case at all. Ivanrose was frankly surprised, because this fact differed from what she knew. Rosanne suggested that her sister find out everything as soon as possible. Rosanna believed that the fruit of her and Michael's love had been created thanks to the power of the Philosopher's Stone. Ivanrose told her sister that Sir Agnioto had recently left the room and that they had probably missed each other. But Roseknight grabbed her sister's hand and squeezed it tightly, saying that she just wanted to see her. The woman had heard that Ivanrose was to be executed that very day. The lady lowered her head. She was overcome with incredible fear. Roseknight hurried to tell her how their father, sisters, and brothers had been executed. According to Roseknight, they had been executed by personal knights. For them, the opportunity to kill with their own hands the person they hated most was a generous gift from Michael. There was nothing sweeter in the world than revenge. The woman gave the example of Bridget, who had been burned. Rosenit thought that her sister was imagining the instant deaths of people, but it was much worse. In fact, a homunculus had long been chosen to accompany the lady to the place of execution. The woman panicked and became alarmed, for she had never had a knight. Rosenit looked closely at her sister and told her that the choice had fallen on the one who wanted to take her life personally. It was the person who wanted Ivanrose's death more than anyone else, Michaelis Agnioto. Ivanrose thought about it. It occurred to her that her sister wanted to tell her that no one else hated her as much as he did. Perhaps it was because she had not appointed a personal knight for herself. For some reason, Michaelis had decided that Ivanrose was a hypocrite who pretended to be different from the other members of her family. The lady then came to the conclusion that the man despised her. Rosenit confirmed that Sir Agneto hated Ivanrose very much. The woman wanted to tell her sister how her execution would take place, but the 7th princess did not want to hear anything and asked her sister to be quiet immediately. Roseknight really wanted to tell her sister everything, believing that she should know. Unable to restrain herself, the woman said that Ivanrose would be beheaded in the most brutal way. The 7th princess's heart began to beat very fast. The woman's hands began to tremble. She was even afraid to think that she would be executed in the same way as in the Hadalamid Empire. The cruel execution consisted of death only after 6 or even 10 blows with a blunt axe. Ivanrose began to tremble violently. The woman's body seemed to be disobeying her. Rosenit hugged her sister and told her that she had come to help. The woman handed her sister some belladonna poison, noting that if she drank it, she would die quickly and painlessly. Rosane thought it was a better way to die than to wait for her end in agony. Ivanrose quietly thanked her sister. The lady felt uncomfortable that Rosine had to do such a thing while she was expecting a child, but the pregnant woman waved her hand, seeing nothing wrong with it. Ivanrose confessed that she did not want her sister to be punished because of her. Ivanrose said goodbye to her sister, but she continued to sit motionless. Rosine wanted to stay in the room with her sister until she drank the poison. The 8th princess wanted to remember her sister's last breath. Ivanrose silently watched as Rosine opened the jar of poison and handed it to her. The woman also urged her sister to drink every last drop. The 7th princess was very confused. Her hands began to tremble. The woman was terribly afraid of death and was not prepared for it to happen so quickly. Lady completely trusted her sister, so she turned off all her thoughts and drank the poison in one gulp. Everything began to blur before the woman's eyes, and her body became as if filled with cotton wool. In reality, Rosenay hated her sister with all her heart and wanted to get rid of her as quickly as possible. After committing the deed, the woman began to laugh loudly and asked if her sister knew the meaning of belladonna in the language of flowers. It meant, "I curse you." The pregnant lady was overjoyed, for now there were no obstacles left in her way. The woman even began to dance around her sister's lifeless body. Roseanne finally breathed a sigh of relief, confident that Michaelis and the throne would belong to her alone. The woman smiled slyly and thanked Ivanrose for her death. After a while, Michaelis came into Ivanrose's room. At first, the man was sure that the woman was asleep, but then he suspected something was wrong. The king was furious, because he had no choice but to keep Ivanrose close to him, as she was quite rebellious. The man had tender feelings for the woman and was deeply shocked by her sudden death. Michaelis began to yell at the maids and guards and demand an explanation. Rosina entered the room and said that her sister had committed suicide. Roseanne also added that the lady had decided to take responsibility as a member of the imperial family and repent by accepting punishment. The king could not understand how the woman knew this information. Rosinit said that she had seen everything with her own eyes. The king looked at the lady from under his brow and asked if she had given Ivanrose the poison. The woman nodded, saying that she had helped her sister repent and pass away. The woman felt that the king was unable to make a decision, and as his partner, she decided to help the lady make the right choice. Rose Knight considered her sister to be quite unyielding, and this was disastrous for the country. Rosen just wanted to be with the king and not have any rivals. But Michaelis did not appreciate the woman's help at all. On the contrary, he became very angry and ordered her to be silent. The king took the dead body of the seventh princess in his arms. His heart ached with grief and pain. But Roseni did not intend to give up, and began to yell at her husband, believing that she had every right to do so as his wife. Michaelis was disgusted to see the princess and ordered her to get out of his way. Meanwhile, the servants asked the lady to remain calm, as His Majesty was not feeling well. The woman was outraged by the servants' behavior and ordered them not to touch her. She considered the servants to be worthless slaves and, without shame, began to insult them. Rosinit was quite stubborn and wanted to fight for her happiness to the end. The woman stood in front of the exit and spread her arms wide, preventing the man from leaving the room. The woman claimed that she was carrying Michael's child and asked to be treated with dignity. Although the king had used alchemy to conceive, he inquired about the health of his unborn child every day. In response, the king merely smiled, claiming that the woman had confused the experiment with pregnancy. Roseni looked at her husband in surprise, unable to believe that she had simply been used. The philosopher's stone only reacted to imperial blood, and the king could only rule over homunculi. His Majesty wanted to get hold of the philosopher's stone by borrowing Roseni's womb and mixing her blood with his own. The shocked woman did not deny the fact that it was their child after all. The king smiled contemptuously, because the child did not even know whose family it belonged to. In Michaelis's opinion, it was too generous to call what was in the woman's womb a child. The man was convinced that what was in the lady's womb was nothing more than an alchemical experiment that had never been performed before. The king himself did not know whether a child or some kind of monster would be born. The woman was speechless at the man's words, considering Michaelis to be very cruel. The man reminded the lady of her past behavior and ordered the servants to hold her back so that she would not prevent him from leaving. Meanwhile, Rosny was beside herself with rage. She screamed and accused her husband of irresponsibility. Michaelis gently leaned against Evenrose, regretting that the lady would not allow him to be near her. After considering the situation, the king made a firm and unyielding decision. Michaelis was willing to pay any price to bring Evenrose back to life. The king wanted to gather all the magicians and alchemists of the empire for his purpose. The seventh princess of the empire, Evenrose Cloel Hadalamid, was a celebrity among the homunculi. She demanded better treatment for women and rejected traditions. She was a princess whom everyone despised. There were many who wanted to become her personal knight, but she did not allow anyone to take this position. Although Michaelis gave up his attempts to become the seventh princess's knight because of her stubbornness, he couldn't stop looking at her. The lady suffered terrible treatment and contempt because of her refusal to follow stupid rules. It was then that Michaelis began to notice something in himself that had never happened to him before. And when His Majesty finally understood everything, he could no longer escape those feelings. Michaelis often watched the beautiful lady. The seventh princess was a member of the imperial family, and he was a homunculus. The man could only dream of Evenrose, because he understood that their union would never be. One day, Michaelis heard rumors about the princess's marriage. The man believed that this was most likely a political marriage. Then Michaelis decided to take over the imperial palace. When the man's dream came true, he no longer had any obstacles, and all that remained was to keep Ivanrose by his side. After Ivanrose drank the poison, the man's heart seemed to stop. He had done all sorts of seemingly meaningless things for the lady, but he did not expect such a turn of events. His Majesty went to a quiet and cozy place to be alone with the lady. The body of his beloved lay motionless on his knees. Suddenly, the butler came and asked Michael to at least eat something. In his grief, the man had not eaten anything for 4 days. He had only recently managed to seize the throne. It was impossible to revive the body of a dead person, but Michaelis seemed to be waiting for the moment when the lady would open her eyes. The king's assistant had once heard that the philosopher's stone could work miracles. To use it, the blood of the Hadalamid family was needed. The ruthless Michael ordered his man to bring Roseni immediately and cut off her head. The eighth princess, Rose Knight, was the last member of the imperial family, and the king himself had previously said that she must be kept alive in order to gain the power of the philosopher's stone. But after the death of Ivanrose, the man no longer wanted anything, for his beloved was dead. Neither the philosopher's stone nor the empire were of any use to him anymore. Suddenly, an advisor informed the king that a wise man had arrived from the forest. Michaelis, without waiting long, immediately asked the wise man if he could revive his beloved. The man felt sorry for disappointing his majesty, but he immediately warned that after the ritual, the king would only get a breathing doll. The wise man noted that the soul of the seventh princess had already separated from her body and scattered. Unfortunately, it was impossible to return her to normal life, even with the help of alchemy and magic. The wise man sadly announced that the true resurrection desired by his majesty was impossible. The sage's answer was no different from what Michaelis had heard before. It occurred to the king that the man was just trying to waste his time, but the sage wanted to offer Michaelis another way. This method was to turn back time. A shiver ran through his majesty's body. The man had no idea that such a thing was even possible, but he was very interested in the magician's proposal. The wise man immediately said that the price for such a service would be very high, as half of the philosopher's stone would have to be used. But for Michaelis, the price was irrelevant. Without wasting any time, the sage began preparations for the ritual. The magician returned to his majesty and wanted to warn him about one more thing. Since the philosopher's stone that was being sacrificed was connected to imperial blood, the seventh princess, not Michaelis, was to be the central axis of time regression. This meant that only Her Majesty would remember all those events. The man touched his beloved and realized that although he would never see her again, she would still have a chance to meet him. The king's thoughts were mixed. He wondered if the lady would choose him again, if he would be desperate, and if he would make another bad decision. The sage had no answer to the man's questions. None of this mattered to Michaelis, and he hurried the magician to begin the ritual. His Majesty felt a little scared, but he had no other choice. During the ritual, the king approached the princess and whispered in her ear that when she came back to life, she must either choose him or kill him. The ritual began to gather momentum and take effect. Various memories and events swirled in Ivanrose's head. First, she saw her sister trying to kill her, then her parents, and later Michaelis. While still in the afterlife, the woman began to understand the whole truth about her sister and Michaelis, who was in love with her. It turned out that the man had tried to replace Rosie with her. Thoughts raced through the lady's mind that her death was a trap. She did not want to die this way at all, and did not understand at what point everything had gone wrong. The woman was tormented by questions about when her father had weakened his position and lost control, and when Bridget had become crown princess. Even Rose wondered what would have happened if Bridget had not been crown princess, but someone else. The lady felt that she had simply turned a blind eye to those who needed her help. The princess dreamed of a second chance, and she was convinced that she could change the course of events. In an instant, the seventh princess opened her eyes. Her heart was beating wildly. The lady realized that she was alive. The woman began to examine her hands and quickly got out of bed, looking around. Ivanrose couldn't understand where she was. The lady knew for sure that she had recently been locked up and that Rosie had come to her and given her poison. The woman couldn't believe she was in the bedroom because this room, like the rest of the palace, was in ruins. Ivanrose approached the books and ran her hand over them. This was definitely not a dream or an illusion, and nothing had changed since the woman had used it. The lady couldn't understand what was happening. The princess approached the mirror and grabbed her face. The woman couldn't believe her eyes, because in the reflection she was quite young. The lady thought that she had returned to the past. The woman began to panic and decided that she had gone mad. Time regression was magical alchemy of the highest order. One had to be a sage to grasp even a thread of it. Ivanrose wanted to meet with her teacher immediately to find out everything. At first, the woman wanted to calm down and think everything through. After a while, the lady came to the conclusion that, judging by the room and her face, she was about 20 years old. It occurred to the lady that if she had indeed returned to the past, then the third princess, Bridget, had not yet become the crown princess, and the leader of the rebellion, Sir Aginto, and Rosie, who had given her the poison, had not yet met. Ivanrose assumed that she was at the very beginning. The lady clasped her hands and hoped that everything would work out for her. The woman decided that, no matter what it took, she would become the crown princess. Her personal maid, Sedela Arfel, entered the lady's room. The woman noted that Her Majesty had woken up early. Ivanrose greeted the maid and complimented her on looking very young that day. Sedela was pleased and decided that it was the wonderful effect of the mask she had used the night before. Ivanrose could clearly see that Sedela looked much younger. The lady no longer had any doubts that she had returned to the past. She just needed to find out exactly when. Ivanrose did not lose her composure and asked the maid if there would be any important events in the coming days. Sedela said that next week was the 20th birthday of the 8th princess, Rosani. Ivanrose felt uneasy. She had never imagined that her sister wanted her dead. Since Rosani was turning 20, the lady already knew that she was 21. The princess was amazed because she had become 8 years younger. It was wonderful, and the woman's mood immediately improved. Sedela reminded Ivanrose that turning 20 was a very special date for the imperial family. On this day, those celebrating their birthdays chose their personal knights, or homunculi, at the selection ceremony. The ceremony was the highlight of the imperial celebrations and the dream of many. A special bond was formed after the oath was taken on a spiritual level. Rumor had it that the homunculi were lining up to become the personal knight of the 8th princess. After all, Her Majesty was the white rose of the empire. Suddenly, Sedela stopped her story and said that it had already been decided who would get the place. Ivanrose was surprised. Sedela asked if the lady remembered the unusual homunculus with silver hair at the ceremony. It was the knight Sylvestian Millard. The lady believed that the man was indeed suitable for Rosani, who was the white rose of the empire. Sylvestrian was skilled with a sword and possessed magic, but he differed from others in his hair. This did not matter much, as homunculi were merely decorations for members of the imperial family. Ivanrose sighed deeply and felt sad, because she knew that Rosani, having met Michael 3 years later, would ruthlessly get rid of Sylvestian. It would have been better if Rosie had chosen him right away. The truth was that Michael had only gotten close to the 8th princess for the sake of the rebellion. He used Rosani to seize the throne and brought the empire to ruin. Ivanrose was determined to stop Michael in that life. She had no choice but to keep Rosie and Sir Aginto as far away from each other as possible. Sedela looked at Ivanrose and told her that many homunculi wanted to offer her their loyalty. The lady laughed, unable to believe that she, a princess who had nothing, was someone's dream. Sedela was saddened and tried to convince the lady otherwise. The maid assured Ivanrose that she had a very good reputation among the homunculi. The princess just laughed. Ivanrose promised Sedela that if she ever rose to prominence, she would find her a wonderful husband with a high income and social status. Sedela thought it would be good if the princess chose a personal knight for herself. Ivanrose stubbornly refused to do so. The woman apologized for bothering the lady with her stubbornness. It was quite difficult for Sedela because of Ivanrose's low status. Since the lady's mother was an alchemist, the girl was considered impure. In addition, the princess's mother had passed away when she was still a child. The woman was an authority on golem alchemy and valued everything that had a subconscious and ego. Ivanrose, like her mother, was convinced that homunculi were no different from humans and asked for better treatment for them. As a result, the seventh princess became a dark spot for the imperial family. At some point, the ladies began to ignore her and reduced her living expenses. Evenrose realized that it was very difficult for Sideli to help her survive in such conditions. It occurred to the lady that after she had been taken captive in her past life, the woman had probably been expelled from the castle. The princess couldn't help herself and gently squeezed Sidela's hand. Ivanrose promised the woman that she would give her a luxurious life. The maid was unassuming and just smiled graciously. Sidela believed that if the lady was happy, then she was happy too. Ivanrose intended to live this life peacefully because it was her reality. She was obliged to do everything in her power. Since the events of 8 years ago were still unfolding, Michael was in a floating prison. In order not to repeat the mistakes of the past, Ivanrose wanted to solve this problem immediately. To do this, the lady needed to meet with her father. The rulers of the Hadalamid Empire were allowed to practice polygamy. For this reason, the emperor had as many as 18 children. Every morning, 4 or 5 princesses and princes were chosen at random to greet the emperor. Ivanrose wanted to ask her father for something. Even as a princess, the lady had to wait for an audience with him. The princess understood that there might not be a better chance than this. That morning, it was Ivanrose's turn to greet her father. The lady asked the maid who else would be present at the morning greeting. Sidela thought for a moment and counted that the 4th and 5th princes would be present, as well as the 3rd and 8th princesses. Evenrose froze. They were Bridget and Rosine. It occurred to the lady that this was the most exciting day of her life. It was the only day that Evanrose would be with her brothers and sisters at the morning greeting. It was the day when the princess fell into Bridget's trap. After breakfast, Evanrose became unkind to her father. The princess decided that since she had returned to the past, she could radically change that day. Knowing everything in advance, Evenrose began to think about how to act. Sidela noticed the lady's concern and suggested that she dress nicely. The thought flashed through the woman's mind that from that day on she would no longer be an ugly duckling. The princess quickly removed the elastic band from her unkempt hair and decided to put on a dress. Sidela was surprised by the lady's sudden change in behavior and realized that she needed to do her hair in an exquisite and elegant style. Sidela combed the princess's hair long and carefully. The woman aptly noted that the 3rd princess was quite graceful and the 8th was charming. The maid suggested that the lady find the perfect balance. Ivanrose wanted to strengthen her political position that morning. Sidela admitted that she was surprised by such enthusiasm in choosing an appearance. The princess smiled and said that from that moment on, she would always try to look her best. The lady had no other choice, as she wanted to become the crown princess. Sidela, hearing these words from the princess, promised that she would do her best to make the lady look stunning. Since Evenrose knew the future, she decided to use it to her advantage. The princess knew in advance what hairstyles her sisters would wear to breakfast, so she decided that her hairstyle had to surpass theirs. Finally, the preparations were complete, and the princess looked completely different from usual. The lady was in a hurry because she was in danger of being late. If it weren't for the guards watching, Ivanrose and her maid would have arrived sooner. Rosie walked behind the 7th princess. The lady froze. It was her first meeting with her sister after she had treacherously given her poison. Inside, Evenrose was trembling with rage. She could not forgive her sister for such betrayal. Rosie was bathed in love and had everything she could ever want. She was also carrying Michael's child, and even the throne was within her grasp. Just to remain the only member of the imperial family, she had treacherously killed her sister. The princess saw the last moments of her life flash before her eyes, and how her sister rejoiced at her death. Evenrose clenched her fist and stared sternly into her sister's eyes, for she was the enemy who had killed her. Rosinante looked at Evenrose in surprise, for the lady's face was like stone. Since there was no time to give in to her emotions, the lady forced a smile. Ivanrose even complimented her sister on her appearance. Rosinante smiled shyly and thanked her politely, noting that the princess had put a lot of effort into preparing for the morning's attire. Ivanrose knew very well that her sister never made empty compliments. Behind Rosie stood a grey-haired homunculus knight, whom the seventh princess already knew well, but said she had never met before. Rosie introduced Sylvestian Millard to her sister. The man was a knight homunculus of the Imperial Guard. The lady explained that she had asked the knight to accompany her to the main palace. Ivanrose just smiled. The eighth princess had been using Sylvestian even before his appointment, and it seemed that she really liked him. Meanwhile, Sylvestian bowed and greeted the seventh princess. The lady felt sorry for the knight, for he was a man who would one day be discarded by Rosinette like a useless object. In her new life, Ivanrose wanted to do everything in her power to prevent something like that from happening, but the girl, in turn, greeted the knight politely, noting that she had heard a lot about him. The seventh princess began to praise the knight for his talent in fencing and magic. The princess added that she believed that the man would worthily defend those to whom he swore his oath. Ivanrose sincerely wished the knight to find a good master. Sylvestian was very impressed by the princess's words. When members of the imperial family saw a knight for the first time, they were usually interested in the color of his hair. Ivanrose seemed very polite and special to the man. Suddenly, the seventh princess remembered that they were late and hurried to her father. A few minutes later, both ladies entered the large hall. Everyone was waiting for them. Already seated at the table were the fourth prince, Rubens Hadalamide, the fifth prince, Icarus Hadalamide, and the third princess, Bridget Agnes Hadalamide. Ivanrose's maid froze in amazement, for everyone looked exactly as the princess had described. Ivanrose and Rosie bowed politely and hurried to the table. The brothers loved their sister Rosie very much and were delighted by her arrival, believing that the white rose of the empire was in all its glory that day. The eighth princess was happy to hear such words from her brothers. The men added that every blade of grass and every leaf in the palace existed only to highlight a flower like Rosie. Ivanrose listened to the compliments her brothers generously bestowed upon her. In the imperial family, where everyone had golden hair, the color of the seventh princess's hair was a symbol of her lowly origins. Ivanrose was used to everyone constantly mocking her for not having pure imperial blood. Her brothers always told her that she would never be able to hide her origins. At that moment, the seventh princess realized that she didn't care about empty talk. The lady watched her brothers enjoy showering Rosie with compliments. The princess decided that it was not the right moment to respond to such indecent ridicule. Her brothers were quite surprised by the lady's behavior that day, as she usually behaved quite differently. Ivanrose believed that if she had been given a second chance, she would take full advantage of it. The princess was convinced that everything would be different in her new life. At that moment, the princess was only concerned about Bridget and Rosny. Suddenly, the door opened and the emperor entered. His Majesty, as always, looked reserved and stern. The man immediately asked if everything was all right with his children. Emperor Desmond Dominic Callisto Hadalamid sat down at the table and announced the beginning of the meal. His Majesty also ordered the servants to bring tea, but Ivanrose prepared the tea herself and brought it in. She announced this loudly to her father and wanted to treat him. Meanwhile, Rosie looked closely at her sister, wondering what she was up to. A smile appeared on His Majesty's face. He was extremely impressed that his daughter had made tea especially for him. Ivanrose said that it was her hobby. She was confident in the taste and wonderful aroma of the tea and asked her father to let him try it. Desmond had no reason to refuse, so he asked the servants to pour the tea his daughter had made. When His Majesty brought the tea closer to him and inhaled the aroma, he noted that the scent was truly unmatched. It was rooibos with lemon juice, and it relieved headaches. Ivanrose explained that this tea was made from dried and crushed leaves of Linnea palatosa. The drink was caffeine-free and rich in vitamins. The seventh princess seemed very observant, as she said that she had recently noticed her father frowning and thought that he was suffering from headaches. The emperor was very pleased with the princess's concern for his health. The man admitted that he had indeed been bothered by headaches lately. Ivanrose told her father that she had taken great care in preparing the tea and had been learning how to brew it since last week. The princess hoped that her father would like the tea. These were just words. In reality, the princess had hastily made the tea from whatever ingredients she could find. But the emperor noted that he felt his headache subsiding. One of the brothers coughed to draw attention to himself. He thought his sister was only interested in alchemy, but she had discovered another talent. Ivanrose felt her brother addressing her mockingly, but she thanked him politely and replied that the art of tea was something similar to alchemy. Ivanrose shared the secret of making fragrant tea with those present. The lady explained that first you had to select all the ingredients, weigh them, and then mix everything in the right proportions. Ivanrose wanted to stand out that day and said that the reason she was able to make such wonderful tea was because she had inherited her father's talent. To the great surprise of everyone present, her father supported his daughter and praised her, noting that she was a young copy of him. Bridget just glanced sideways at her father and then at her sister. The seventh princess said that her father was exaggerating and noted that her third sister was much better than her. The brothers and sisters looked at each other silently. None of them could understand what had happened to Ivanrose. Bridget even thought that the lady was trying to copy her. Previously, the princess had been distinguished by her icy indifference, and suddenly she decided to attract her father's attention. Meanwhile, the emperor laughed and remarked that his daughter's words sounded as if she was afraid of Betty. Bridget immediately said that she was glad to have such a smart sister as Evenrose. Rubens decided to divert attention from Evenrose and reminded everyone that it was Rose's birthday soon. He said that his sister would soon have her own personal night, and that this event was worthy of celebration throughout the empire. Rosie thought it was just a normal ceremony that every member of the imperial family had to go through. The lady admitted that she was worried about it. The eighth princess was ashamed to admit it, but she had no talent for either magic or alchemy. And the lady was not entirely sure that she would be able to impress the knight in a dignified manner. Her father tried to calm his daughter down and asked her not to worry about it. He also added that every member of their family was capable of impressing at least one homunculus. The eighth princess wanted to remind her father that the seventh princess had completely rejected the homunculus knight. Rosie sighed and said loudly that she wanted to be like her sister Eve because she didn't care about such things at all. A dead silence fell in the room. Rosie glanced sideways at her sister. Her father broke the silence and refuted his daughter's words about Ivanrose. The emperor considered the princess quite capable. Desmond focused on Ivanrose and asked her to think about choosing a personal knight. He also added that everyone had to follow the traditions of the imperial family. It seemed that Evenrose did not want to bring up the subject of homunculi at all. Her father understood everything from one glance at his daughter. He knew very well that the princess would refuse a knight because she was as stubborn as her mother. For the first time, Ivanrose dared to contradict her father, saying that this was not true. The princess wanted to take advantage of the opportunity presented to her and said that she had previously thought very narrowly. The lady explained that her difficult character had caused her father a lot of worry, and added that she had thought a lot about things the previous night. Evenrose looked at her father and announced that she wanted a personal knight. Everyone present was stunned by her sister's statement. The emperor was also quite surprised and asked his daughter to repeat her words. Desmond was very happy that the seventh princess had finally come to her senses. He asked his daughter to sit down next to him as soon as possible because he had a lot to discuss. Rosie watched what was happening in amazement. It occurred to her that things had taken a very strange turn. Her father first asked when Ivanrose wanted the ceremony to take place. The princess did not like formalities, so she asked her father to keep everything quiet and peaceful. Desmond was so happy that he couldn't hide his joy. He was eager to know if his daughter had already chosen a homunculus. Ivanrose smiled at her father and told him that she had chosen a homunculus who was a monster from a floating prison, Michaelis Agnioto. Silence fell in the hall. The father did not expect his daughter to choose such a dubious homunculus. Rubens was dissatisfied, rose from the table, and accused his sister of not thinking with her head. Michaelis refused to swear allegiance and was thrown into prison for it. The man was a monster whom even his majesty could not force to obey. Rubens was shocked that his sister wanted to impress Michaelis. The lady did not lose her composure and immediately asked her brother if he wanted to call his majesty's actions a failure. Rubens, in his defense, began to explain that the problem lay with the homunculus himself and that his father had nothing to do with it. Desmond watched his children's conversation sternly. Rubens quickly apologized to his father for his words. His Majesty considered Michaelis a dangerous type who had not even passed the selection ceremony yet. The election ceremony was an event at which homunculi were brainwashed into absolute loyalty to the imperial family. If Michaelis had been an ordinary homunculus, he would have been removed the moment something went wrong. But thanks to his amazing abilities, his punishment was limited to imprisonment in a floating prison. Evenrose's desire to impress Michaelis could be seen as a challenge to the power of the imperial family. Ivanrose decided that she should be careful. The lady asked her father if homunculi had to go through a selection ceremony before going out into the world. The ceremony for homunculi was like a blessing from the emperor, and in that situation, only the homunculus himself lost. The princess found the very idea of refusing the ceremony strange. Ivanrose did not understand how a pitiful homunculus could refuse the power of his majesty. The lady suggested that the reason was not what it seemed, but was hidden in the currents of mana. The emperor thought about it. Ivanrose announced that she wanted to settle all issues and force Michaelis to serve her as her personal knight. The lady wanted to do this thanks to the abilities she had inherited from her father. Ivanrose told her father about all her actions so well that he thought about it and decided that his daughter was quite clever. The princess once again asked her father to allow her to resolve all the issues. After thinking it over, Desmond agreed, but on one condition. His daughter listened carefully to her father and accepted his proposal. Ivanrose and her maid set off for the place her father had indicated, despite the bad weather. It was quite cold outside and snow was falling. To keep from freezing, the lady used warming magic. This place was a polar region and was not marked on any map of the empire. The women approached the homunculus training complex. Every year, over 100 newly created homunculi were sent there. Over the next 15 years, they were trained and taught to serve the imperial family. But only those homunculi who passed the exams and received the first rank could earn the right to serve in the palace. However, homunculi were merely expendable material for the imperial family, not to mention the homunculi of lower ranks. It was surprising that there had been no uprisings so far. When the women approached the territory, they were greeted by a courteous man accompanied by 2 knights. The gentleman introduced himself as Baron Pete Urk, the manager of the homunculus complex. Evenrose thought that it must be difficult for the manager to be in such a tense place all the time. The man just smiled and invited them to follow him to the floating prison. Pete Urk told the lady that most of the homunculi who went out into the world had black hair. However, when the homunculi remained in the training complex, their hair was bright and light. This was due to a limiter that was used to prevent magic from passing through the mana flow. Therefore, the homunculi's hair became lighter. As soon as the limiter was removed, the hair returned to its usual black color. This is why Sylvestrian Millard was quite popular. The manager said that he only learned about this after he was appointed to his position. Pete compared the men to insects, which greatly surprised Ivanrose. The lady and the manager arrived at the entrance to the prison where Michaelis was being held. A small elevator arrived to take the young people down to the homunculus. Ivanrose was surprised to see that Michaelis's hair had turned pink. It occurred to the woman that this was why homunculi were called dolls. The princess did not expect to see a man in such a terrible state. The homunculus was in a small cage and bound on all sides with heavy chains. Michael had a piece of metal in his mouth that prevented him from speaking. It was very difficult to look at the man. Meanwhile, Pete, cursing the homunculus, ordered him to immediately show respect to Her Highness the Princess. Michaelis was surprised by the visit of the distinguished lady. He could not understand why a member of the imperial family had come to him. The steward ordered the servants to bring him a whip, as he wanted to deal with the disobedient homunculus. Ivanrose was frightened and asked them to stop shouting. Then the lady went straight to the homunculus. Pete and Sedella were very frightened and asked the princess not to go so close to the man. The steward began to assure the princess that it was dangerous. But Ivanrose would not listen to anyone and wanted to speak to the man herself. The lady approached Michaelis and introduced herself. The princess could see that the man was in agony. She briefly told the homunculus about their past life. Evenrose felt that Michaelis had been kinder to her in his past life, because he had never looked at her so sternly before. The homunculus had once wanted Ivanrose to choose him as her knight. Her Majesty explained that this was the reason she had come. At first, the princess wanted the homunculus to be released so they could talk normally. But as the magician had said, Michaelis remembered nothing. The man asked the princess why she had come. Evenrose did not hesitate and said that she had come to make Michaelis her personal knight. The man had already heard that the seventh princess had flatly refused a knight, so he was quite surprised. Ivanrose said that she desperately needed to strengthen her position as heiress. It occurred to Michaelis that the lady had already heard stories about him. He did not want to be led by a woman, so he explained that if she was looking for a slave, she had come to the wrong place. But Ivanrose declared even louder that she was not looking for a slave. She assured the man that she needed him. Michaelis asked her to stop joking, believing that he would be her slave anyway. The homunculus was convinced that the lady was no different from other members of the imperial family. Ivanrose tried to explain to the man that she was very different from other members of the dynasty. Her Majesty pointed out that she did not need a knight to treat him like trash. The woman looked intently at her husband and said firmly that she did not need anyone else but him. Evenrose repeated once again to the homunculus that only he could become her knight. Michaelis could not understand why him. The lady could not tell him everything right away, but she assured him that when he became her knight, he would learn everything. The princess promised Michaelis that she would respect him as much as possible. The lady also noted that she would never use the power of impression to force a man to do something humiliating. Michaelis considered Ivanrose's words to be empty talk because the impression was an absolute magical contract. The lady could only ask him to trust her. She held out her hand to the homunculus and officially asked him to be her knight. The lady's gaze was too imploring, but Michaelis still looked away and wanted to refuse her. He convinced himself that imperial blood also flowed in that woman. The homunculus remembered how the emperor had given him harsh orders, and he had refused to obey them. That was when Michaelis first experienced cruel treatment from the emperor. After that, the man was taken to a floating prison. Michaelis did not want to be a slave to the imperial regime. Evenrose continued to beg the man to agree and offered to leave the prison together. Michaelis hated the ruling family with all his heart and considered all members of the imperial family to be exactly the same. After thinking it over, the man decided that if he became a personal knight, he would be able to leave prison. This was the only way to free the homunculus, and he was ready to go, even though he didn't want to. Michaelis offered Evrea his hand and agreed. The homunculus said that he did not want to renounce his oath of allegiance to the emperor. Ivanrose smiled at the man and was glad that she had been able to convince him. Michaelis looked intently at the princess and warned that everything could be stopped at that moment. The man assured the woman that something could go wrong and she would be in danger. It occurred to the lady that the homunculus was worried about her. Evenrose wanted to start the ceremony as soon as possible. The entire cage was illuminated by light. It was not easy, but the princess tried to concentrate on her strength as best she could. The woman began to tremble and asked Michaelis to hold her. The princess understood that she had no right to make a mistake, because her father's condition was that if she failed to impress Michaelis, she would have to kill him with her own hands at that very moment. Ivanrose had no right to fail, and was obliged to complete her task at any cost. Suddenly, all the stones from the headdress on the princess's head gathered together and formed a butterfly in the air. It occurred to Michaelis that these were fragments of the philosopher's stone. More precisely, it was an alchemical crystal of enhancement. The homunculus was very disturbed by the fact that the woman had forbidden high-ranking artifacts with her. That day, Evenrose had specifically asked her servants to dress her exactly as she instructed. The lady wanted to wear the jewelry of the late 6th Empress. On this day, Ivanrose wanted to borrow her mother's strength. Standing before Michaelis, the princess silently begged her mother to help her. The lady gave it her all. Meanwhile, the homunculus watched everything and realized that Evenrose was hardly worth such efforts. The 7th princess took her husband's hands and squeezed them tightly. She also added that she must have him. The young couple's hands glowed with incredible power. Suddenly, both the lady and the homunculus noticed a glow on their chests. The princess stared at Michaelis in amazement, unable to believe that she had succeeded. In an instant, something pushed the young people away from each other. Evenrose felt herself beginning to fall, but the homunculus, whose hair had already darkened, caught her. Evenrose noticed that the restraints had disappeared. This was the first time something like this had happened to the lady. Michaelis noted with surprise that as soon as the princess was in danger, his body moved on its own. Michaelis intended to put an end to the knights behaving like slaves, although it was worse than slavery. The mere thought that a hair might fall from his master's head made him shudder. Evenrose blinked in surprise and asked if the man had called her mistress. Michaelis couldn't understand why the lady was asking such strange questions, as it was obvious. Taken by surprise, Ivanrose fell to her knees and thanked her mother for her help. The lady couldn't get over the fact that everything had worked out and that she had made Michaelis her personal knight. It turned out that the ceremony required much more effort than it seemed. Michaelis was convinced that humans were weaker than homunculi. The man held out his hand to the lady to help her up. When the princess told her father that she had managed to make Michael her personal knight, he began to treat her better and gave her a box of gold. The emperor also gave Ivanrose more servants. This surprised the lady, but she was pleased. On the way, the seventh princess met Sir Millard and greeted him politely. The man was glad to see the woman and told her that he was returning after escorting Princess Rosie. The lady, in turn, informed the homunculus that she was returning from the selection ceremony. Sir Millard had previously heard that the seventh princess did not intend to choose a homunculus, so he was quite surprised. The man apologized in advance, but he was eager to know who had been honored to become the princess's personal knight. Ivanrose smiled and kindly said that she had chosen Michael Agniotto for the role. The homunculus congratulated the lady on her choice of personal knight and asked permission to leave. It occurred to the princess that something had happened to Sir Millard, because he was behaving strangely. Ivanrose finally returned to her room. The maid noted that the lady had arrived just in time. The servant had already chosen Michael's new outfit. The man looked simply stunning, and the princess froze in her tracks. She was struck by the homunculus's beauty. Ivanrose finally understood why the picky Rosie couldn't resist the man. If she were an ordinary person, she would have fallen in love with Michaelis. Evenrose couldn't take her eyes off the man. Michaelis, meanwhile, wondered why the lady was looking at him so strangely. It was an unexpected question, and the princess was embarrassed. The lady added that the new uniform suited the man very well. Michaelis regretted not having a sword. Ivanrose immediately promised to choose the best sword for him in the near future. Michaelis noted that since the princess had impressed the knight, she could easily demand a sword as payment. Usually, swords were issued together with uniforms. Since the members of the imperial family considered knights to be nothing more than decorations, everyone tried to find weapons for them that would make them stand out from the rest. The princess had completely forgotten this fact, which is why she was not given a good sword to start with. Michaelis did not ask the lady to take care of this, he simply stated the facts. The homunculus knew everything very well, and it seemed as if he had already lived in the palace. In fact, the homunculi were taught everything in the training complex. Michaelis had to learn court etiquette, the knowledge necessary for life in the palace, and, of course, all aspects of serving the imperial family. There was a tense atmosphere in the air. The lady suggested that the homunculus discuss everything over a cup of tea. The princess was glad that Michaelis did not refuse to talk. Ivanrose believed that she and the knight should become closer as soon as possible. The impression was only temporary, because Michaelis was soon to proclaim himself king of the homunculi. Her Majesty was sure that Michaelis would have no trouble overcoming the power of the contract. The princess knew very well that if the man decided to revolt, she would be powerless to stop him. From that moment on, the princess wanted to establish a connection with the knight, because becoming partners was her main goal. In a previous life, Ivanrose and Michaelis had once shared a cup of tea. The lady had merely been polite, not expecting the man to actually agree. However, the homunculus left, citing the need to serve alongside Rosie. The princess personally served tea to her knight. Evenrose said that she did not know the man's taste at all and asked if he enjoyed the tea. The homunculus thanked her politely. Michaelis noted that the color of the tea was very similar to the color of the princess's eyes. The lady gazed at the man. He seemed to mesmerize her with his beauty. After a while, the woman quickly looked away so that the knight would not suspect anything. Ivanrose said that she was going to visit Her Majesty, the eighth princess. A little later, the princess asked the knight if he enjoyed going out. Michaelis experienced strange and ambiguous feelings, and many things reminded him of Ivanrose's hair color. The princess was surprised because her hair was not green. The woman said that her hair was lime blonde. Michaelis made the lady her first set, noting that her hair color was uniquely beautiful. The princess was embarrassed, and for a moment thought that the knight was talking about the imperial garden. She quickly suggested that they take a walk there together in the near future. The man smiled, because he was referring not so much to the garden as to the lady's hair. Silence fell in the room. Suddenly, Evenrose asked if Michaelis hated the imperial family. The knight replied that he did. The princess felt uncomfortable and pointed out that she was also a member of the imperial family. Michaelis seemed to have swallowed water. The man generally felt hostility toward the emperor, but he liked Evenrose. Michaelis regretted saying something stupid. He looked at the lady and said that if he didn't focus on it, he didn't hate her at all. The knight immediately thought that the impression had had an effect. The homunculus came to the conclusion that if you constantly hate your master, you can get tired. Michaelis didn't feel very well. He was afraid that without realizing it, he would become the emperor's lackey. Ivanrose smiled and assured her husband that this would not happen. The knight repeated that he was afraid of becoming loyal to the emperor right in front of the princess. The homunculus found this situation strange. The princess reiterated that nothing of the sort would happen. At least it certainly hadn't happened in her past life. Michaelis was quite surprised that Evenrose allowed him to speak to her informally. The knight was convinced that the lady would change after the impression, but this did not happen. Ivanrose proudly raised her head and noted that her personal knight, as an exception, could address her informally. The princess allowed Michaelis to address her as he wished when they were alone or together with Sedela. The knight looked intently at the lady and reminded her that she had promised to tell him something. The homunculus was curious as to why the princess wanted him to be her knight. Since he had become one, he wanted to know all the details. The lady announced that her goal was to become crown princess. Ivanrose's main desire was to become empress, and her main goal was to free the homunculi. Michaelis was shocked by the woman's confession. Then the homunculus realized that the lady needed a knight in order to attain a certain status in high society. The crown princess was actually very important to Tsetsu, as important as politics. Ivanrose understood that a white crow could never become an heiress. The oath of allegiance ceremony was scheduled for that week, and the next important event was to take place the following week. Soon, the 8th princess's 20th birthday celebration was to take place. It was the first official event at which the lady was going to appear with her personal knight. This day was supposed to be very important. The princess was interested in Michaelis's plans. The man replied that he was obliged to always be with his mistress. Usually, personal knights accompanied their masters from the moment they woke up until late at night. If there were no specific orders, the homunculi slept and ate in the barracks of the imperial knights in the north. The knights homunculi lived in groups under strict surveillance in the barracks of the imperial guard. Personal knights did not have any special privileges in this regard. However, they could skip roll call if they were serving a member of the imperial family. On the day a knight was chosen, there was a traditional inspection. It was customary for the homunculus to demonstrate his nighttime skills to his master. While the young men were talking, evening fell. It was time for the inspection. Michaelis became agitated, and his heart began to beat faster. The man's imagination painted various pictures. The knight imagined himself and the princess in the bedroom, wearing only their underwear. The lady interrupted the man's thoughts. She hinted to him that it was time to leave. Michaelis was surprised, as he had no doubt that they would go to the bedroom for the inspection. The homunculus believed that the 7th princess was the same as the other members of the imperial family, but this turned out to be untrue. As a result, the man only embarrassed himself. Sir Agneto left Aurelia's room, but the maid called him back. Sedela told the man that Her Majesty rarely made tea for anyone herself, and that only 3 people had ever been granted such an honor in her memory. The maid said that those people were Lady's teacher, who was a master of alchemy, the mistress of the magic tower, and the late 4th empress. All of them were people whom Ivanrose respected and valued. Sedela wanted Michaelis to know this and appreciate Lady. The man was impressed by this information and promised to take it into account. The next morning, Ivanrose and her personal knight came to her father. The daughter introduced Michaelis to the emperor. Desmond haughtily remarked that before him stood the same dishonourable scoundrel who had refused to take the oath. Evenrose asked her father not to be angry and explained that Michaelis had not renounced his oath of his own free will. Desmond thought about it and waited for an explanation. The lady noted that, as she had thought, the problem lay in the flow of mana. When the princess saw Sir Aginto in person, she was finally convinced. The woman managed to fix the problem by clearing some channels. Evenrose admitted that luck was on her side at that moment. The princess saw her father's stern gaze and thought that he did not believe her. But the man, looking intently at his daughter, asked her what she was afraid of. Desmond laughed and could not understand why Evenrose was so afraid to admit her extraordinary abilities. Every time the princess stood before her father, she was overcome not by fear, but by feelings that overwhelmed her. These feelings were awe and respect for her father. The emperor did not expect such pleasant words from his daughter. He was proud of Ivanrose, and that she had finally begun to use her talents wisely. Desmond acknowledged that the princess had tamed the monster, and that was commendable. The emperor also noted that the new outfit made the homunculus look more friendly. At one point, the seventh princess asked her father to stop calling the man a monster and to treat him with respect. Desmond heard his daughter's request and was ready to make concessions. But until the ritual was completed, whoever the man was, the emperor could not recognize him as a true knight. Desmond loudly addressed Michaelis and ordered him to kneel before him. The princess looked imploringly at Michaelis and secretly squeezed his hand. The young people exchanged glances. The homunculus asked the lady not to worry and knelt before the emperor. Desmond rolled up his sleeve and placed his hand on the knight's forehead. Then he began the ritual. The emperor ordered Michaelis Agni, who had been created by the art of alchemy, to obey the members of the imperial family from that moment on. Desmond also declared loudly that the homunculus would never dare to go against his masters and would not be able to resist their will until his last breath. The ritual was complete. The emperor was happy to have finally subdued the rebellious homunculus. But that wasn't enough for Desmond, and he ordered the knight to kiss the ground at his feet. Ivanrose watched intently. The lady noticed that the knight was in no hurry to obey the emperor and decided to intervene. She said that slaves had been humiliated in this way 2 centuries ago. At the same time, Ivanrose was very worried because she understood that if she went against her father's will, it would kill the monster of the floating prison. The princess decided to help the knight make the right decision. The lady called Michael, forcing him to obey his father. The homunculus overcame himself and finally did as he was told. After a while, the young people were already walking in the garden. Evenrose asked Michael how he felt. The man noted that the moment when the lady impressed him was completely different. The princess looked at her knight with regret and wanted to touch him. The lady asked him to forgive her and said that she was glad that the knight had overcome himself. Evenrose promised Michael that from that day on she would protect him and never allow such a shameful incident to happen again. It was time to return to the estate. Gomunkel felt that when he was near the lady, he had the feeling that there were no problems at all. The man hurried to catch up with Evenrose and wanted to escort her. Meanwhile, the distinguished lords and ladies who were Princess Bridget's subordinates were discussing some issues. Among them was the chief shareholder of the Third Empire, Bridget's financial and political supporter, Marquis Chancel. Rumours reached the man that Her Majesty, the seventh princess, had chosen a personal knight. The most interesting thing was that the homunculus was a monster from a floating prison. Marquis Remakel, head of the Empire's military affairs, and a relative of Bridget, could not understand why such drastic changes had occurred in the woman's life. Remakel also noted that Evanrose was a person who never went anywhere except the library. Viscountess Fritz, advisor to Marquis Remical, was also confused by the woman's behaviour. Bridget reassured her guests, saying that the seventh princess was well aware of the need to choose a personal knight. Her Majesty thought that her sister had decided to fight for the throne. Bridget did not believe that there were any other reasons for such drastic changes. The men pointed out that the seventh princess had no foundation. Bridget, in turn, asked the men not to worry. Mrs. Fritz had a bad feeling, but Bridget asked them to stop talking about Evenrose and focus on more important things. Bridget's personal knight knew very well that the Viscountess Fritz was rarely upset. The man was very curious to know what the seventh princess of his knight had in mind. Ivanrose asked Sedella for her opinion on the new servants. The woman noted that, as expected of the third empress, the maids seemed sincere and loyal. Ivanrose was delighted that Sedella herself approved of the maids. This meant that they had sent truly good women. The time came when the princess informed Sedella that from now on, instead of household chores, she would entrust her with matters outside the estate. First, the princess asked the maid to visit the blacksmiths. It occurred to the servant that Evenrose wanted to order a sword for Sir Aginto. This was indeed the case. The lady also noted that the preparation of the alchemy workshop needed to be completed. It was to be a small workshop, designed for about 3 people. Evenrose asked Sedilla to see if there were any decent estates south of the Ravello River. Rumour had it that the cost of houses was about to rise, and the princess considered it a good investment. The princess understood well that in order to enter into a real battle for the throne, certain conditions had to be met. Michael's impression was only the beginning, which the lady had noticed in social circles. The next task was financial support. Evenrose had already calculated that this problem would be solved as soon as Sedilla finished preparing the workshop. The most serious problems were ahead. The first candidate for the throne was the third princess, Bridget. The reason lay in her various achievements. But the main factor in Bridget's favour was her supporters. She had more of them than anyone else. Ivanrose understood that she also needed supporters who could fight back. Ivanrose decided that the upcoming reception for Rosny's birthday was an opportunity that could not be missed. The princess already had a list of people with whom she needed to establish contact at the reception. All the princess had to do was wait for Sedella to carry out her orders. Evenrose immediately thought of Michael and hoped that he would not encounter other members of the imperial family. The princess was concerned that the homunculus would not run into Rosie, as he had in the past. Ivanrose really did not want Michaelis and Rosie to meet before her impression. Meanwhile, Michaelis trained hard. The monster of the floating prison became the princess's personal knight, and the other homunculi whispered about it. The men believed that Michaelis had come to his senses after his imprisonment. The homunculi believed that if Michaelis had submitted to his majesty from the beginning, he would not have ended up in prison. The men watched as Michaelis used his mighty strength against the stone giant. The other homunculi considered Michaelis a true monster who was a master swordsman. Suddenly, Sylvestian approached Sir Aginto and handed him a bottle of water. Sylvestian was impressed by the knight's power, but asked him to control his strength next time, explaining that the cost of repairing the golem would have to be paid by Her Majesty, the seventh princess. Sylvestrian also asked the knight not to break anything. Michaelis thanked him for the warning, and the young men introduced themselves to each other. Sylvestrian confessed that he had actually come to the man with one question. He was interested in whether the rumours about changes after the imperial family's visit were true. Michaelis replied frankly that there had to be a certain line, but he had not yet felt any particular emotions. After the impression, his priorities had changed in a natural way, and it was quite strange. Sylvestrian suggested that after the impression ceremony, he would give his heart to Her Majesty, the 8th princess. Gomunkul did not know if this was a good thing or not. Michaelis thought about it and decided that one of the members of the imperial family had left an impression on Sylvestrian's soul. Sir Agnero admitted frankly that he did not like it very much. Sylvestrian couldn't understand what Michaelis meant, because at first he said that priorities had changed naturally, and then suddenly changed his mind. Michaelis believed that even when things were difficult, one had to have one's own point of view. The knight was convinced that when homunculi became tiresome, they were simply disposed of. Sylvestian was convinced that the princess herself was not like everyone else, and would hardly ever get rid of her personal knight. The man felt that he was interfering with Sir Aginto's training, so he shook his hand and said goodbye. Both men were glad to have talked to each other. Michael noted that he hadn't spoken to anyone in a long time. Sylvestrian suggested that they practice together sometime. For a moment, Michaelis lost his mind, because the mere thought that Ivanrose would one day want to get rid of him made the man shudder. The 7th princess was also a member of the imperial family, and it was quite logical to assume that she could do the same with her knight. Nevertheless, Michaelis couldn't understand why he was so angry, assuming that it was just the impression. Suddenly, someone called out to the homunculus. It was Ivanrose. The knight straightened his shoulders. He thought something had happened, because the lady had come to him without warning. The princess calmed her husband and said that she was just out for a walk and decided to drop by. Evenrose asked if her husband liked life in the palace. Michaelis replied that it was livable, as it was quite peaceful around. The lady also asked if other members of the imperial family had been bothering her husband. Michaelis said that only at the training ground did the other homunculi discuss him, but they did not approach him. The princess suggested that her knight take a short walk, as she wanted to show him a place. Michaelis looked around and was amazed by the beauty of the plants. He never thought he would see something like this even once in his life. The homunculus considered himself lucky to have escaped from the training camp. The lady led the knight to a greenhouse, which was the fruit of magic, alchemy, and flowers. Although the man had not been able to master alchemy, he understood the role that magic played in this case. The man felt a truly powerful magical structure and streams of mana. The lady recalled that homunculi could not use alchemy. In the Imperial Alchemical Book of Harmony, this was explained by the nature of things. Just as humans could not use the power of the Creator, homunculi, created with the help of alchemy, could not use it either. On the other hand, homunculi were incapable of creation from the very beginning, so it was said that they had no reproductive function. But Ivanrose clearly remembered that Rosie was carrying Michaelis's child. It occurred to the princess that the answer was hidden in the Philosopher's Stone, which only the Emperor and his heirs had access to. Evenrose thought deeply, and Michaelis asked if everything was all right. The princess confessed that she was thinking about how to have a child. Michaelis was shocked by what he heard, and pointed out that homunculi cannot have children. The lady laughed and said that was not what she meant at all. The princess said that she was just curious whether homunculi were completely infertile regardless of gender. Since Ivanrose looked into her husband's eyes during the conversation, he felt that she was not telling him everything. Rosinette's birthday arrived. After bathing and caring for her skin and hair, Ivanrose was quite tired. Sadella said that the 8th princess had been trying to make an impression for 2 hours, and it usually took an hour. Rosie had no talent for alchemy, so she had to perform the impression ceremony 5 times. In the end, she managed to complete the ritual only thanks to 2 fragments of the Philosopher's Stone. At that time, this was kept secret. Meanwhile, Sadella wondered if the 8th princess would be able to complete the ceremony safely. Ivanrose reassured the woman, explaining that there was no cause for concern. The lady knew very well that Rosie always got what she wanted. Sadella said that Sir Aginto was supposed to answer to Her Majesty that day and had arrived early. Since it was only necessary to greet the guests, Evenrose asked if it was necessary to stay at the celebration until the end. The maid said that it was not strictly necessary, but warned the lady that Michael must remain with her at all times. Sadella escorted the princess to the hall. The servants were flustered because they had not yet had time to prepare Michael for the party. When Evenrose saw the half-naked man, she was speechless. She even blushed.